Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about the next set of G.I. Joe comics. All of these comics were released in 1990, and they were all written by Larry Hama. Almost all of them were drawn by Mark Bright, who's been the regular artist on G.I. Joe for some time now, but one of the issues in here was drawn by Lee Weeks, who did a majority of the covers in this little era. But yeah, the G.I. Joe comic at this time is going through a lot of really kind of odd changes. A lot of stuff has been happening to the Joes, for the Joes, around the Joes, and throughout this whole era of the comic, there's always been like 3 or 4 threads kind of raveling together throughout the comic. So all of these stories are interspersed with the story from the last video, and with the story before that, and with the video before that. And it kind of just gets to be it just gets to be a lot at a certain point with all the different through lines going on in the comic. That is something that kind of changes, starting with this story and the next one. You really do get a more focused feeling comic. But honestly, I do want to provide a little bit of background for what's going on in this story, because quite a bit has happened that if you're not at least a little caught up on, it's going to feel really odd. So, there are a few stories to be aware of. There are a few main characters to be aware of. The biggest ones are Scarlet, Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, Stalker, and I guess Cobra Commander. Those are kind of your named characters who are going to be appearing throughout the story. And we'll kind of go over the last major event that happens to each of these characters. So for Snake Eyes and Scarlet, you're going to want to flash back to the Snake Eyes trilogy, where Baroness does her whole revenge plot against Snake Eyes, doesn't end up working out, and Snake Eyes ends up blowing up the Cobra Consulate building. But a major part of that story is that the Baroness shoots Scarlet in the head. We see that Scarlet survived, but she's comatose. So that's kind of where Scarlet's at, and that's where Snake Eyes is at in response to that. Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes are good buddies, naturally. At this point in the comics run, that shouldn't come as much of a surprise. But they're old war buddies, and they're kind of like brothers, is the easiest way to explain that relationship. And then you've got Stalker, who's kind of also good friends with Snake Eyes. Let's see, is there any other background? Yes, throughout the story, there's going to be mention of a government cabal called the Jugglers. The Jugglers had appeared earlier in the G.I. Joe comic, right after the Cobra Civil War, and they were this antagonist group of like government bigwigs, generals, all that stuff, and they were kind of working to discredit and disband the G.I. Joe team throughout their first story. But I think that's a lot of the broader context. But yeah, you get some really nice covers throughout this era. Like I said, most of them are done by Lee Weeks. Let's see, Weeks. Doesn't say, but it looks like either Weeks or Bright. This is Lee Weeks. This is Lee Weeks. This one is signed, but I can't tell who it's signed by. Yep, nope, no idea. But anyway, throughout the story today, there's going to be a lot of Snake Eyes, a lot of Storm Shadow, a lot of ninja action going on in the G.I. Joe comic. So yeah, I think with all that being said, let's just hop straight into our story, which today is going to be opening in the aftermath of the Snake Eyes trilogy as Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow visit the comatose Scarlet in the hospital, when all of a sudden Scarlet's sister barges in with a court order allowing her to pull the plug on Scarlet's life support. We also see that Scarlet's sister has gotten Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow removed from the hospital room. But after Scarlet's life support is pulled, Snake Eyes runs into the room, removing his bandages and speaking the only words we ever hear him say, being simply the name of the woman he loves, who he assumes is going to die without life support. Storm Shadow then busts in on the Jugglers, who are an anti-Joe government cabal. And Storm Shadow beats up their guards before demanding to be given a dangerous mission. Storm Shadow even goes as far as leveraging blackmail about how the Jugglers betrayed an American soldier named George Strawwhacker against them, until they agree to send Snake Eyes on a mission to free Strawwhacker from the gulags of Barovia. We then see Scarlet's sister kick Snake Eyes and Stalker out of the hospital, and as they walk down the street, we see Storm Shadow get out of a taxi and give Snake Eyes the dossier on Strawwhacker. And we learn that Strawwhacker was originally engaged to Snake Eyes' twin sister before her death in a car accident, which is why Snake Eyes agrees to go. And since Snake Eyes believes Scarlet, and another significant factor is that Snake Eyes believes Scarlet is basically already dead, and Storm Shadow really does push him in that direction. But before Storm Shadow kicks him out of the plane, Storm Shadow does something to him, saying, "You made the right decision, Snake Eyes. All the doctors agree that Scarlet will never awake from her coma. In effect, she died when the Baroness shot her. On the other hand, you are the one man who could possibly rescue George Strawwhacker, the man your late sister loved. Stand by in the Bombay. We are approaching the Barovian border. You are going to be totally on your own. Barovia's communist government has toppled. The two interim governments have already fallen. It's anarchy down there. You're going to have to be harder than you've ever been. Look at me. You will need the power of the Arashanagi mindsets, the ninja conditioning trance that clears the mind of all distracting personal thoughts and allows you to become a lethal machine. To survive this mission, you will have to become an inextricable engine of destruction, remorseless, cunning, and totally unstoppable. You will feel no joy other than the triumphant ecstasy of victory over your enemies. You will feel no pain other than that which will kill you, and you will find untapped reserves of strength in the deepest troughs of despair. Go forth as a killing wraith, and let no man deter you." You've really done it now, Stormy. I sure hope you know what you're doing. It's a case of tough love. Somebody had to act, and I did it. But at that very moment, back in New York, we see that Scarlet has woken up from her coma. Snake Eyes comes parachuting into Barovia, where we see that the communist government has been overthrown, and that the upper Barovians, some sort of ethnic class, are working on killing off the last of the security police and removing a bunch of ethnic minorities from Barovia. A group of security police are about to open fire on that smattering of Barovians until Snake Eyes swings in and starts killing them, eventually getting all of them before jumping out the window. Back in the stealth bomber that Stalker and Storm Shadow dropped Snake Eyes out of, we see that Stalker and Storm Shadow are immediately knocked out and captured by the Jugglers. who also tells Storm Shadow that Scarlet is awake, so that he feels pretty bad about sending his boy Snake Eyes on this little suicide run. But back in Barovia, we see that the people are planning to burn the headquarters of the security police, and we are reintroduced to the White Clown, who we saw last time we were in Barovia, who recognizes Snake Eyes as he goes running into the building so that he can obtain the records. The clown follows behind Snake Eyes, and eventually the police surrender, and Snake Eyes ignores all of that's going on, and he goes digging through the files until he finds what he's looking for, and he leaves. The leader of the Barovians plans to execute the surrendered police, but one of the police's daughters comes up to Snake Eyes and asks him to save her dad, but because of the trance, he doesn't. He simply walks away and drives off to the gulag where Strawwhacker and the White Clown's lady love are both being held. And all of those security police officers are executed. We then see that Snake Eyes and the White Clown have arrived at the gulag, and Snake Eyes runs in, guns blazing. Back in New York, we see that Hawk has told Scarlet about the current situation with Snake Eyes, and she wants Storm Shadow's head. But the leader of the jugglers assures her that they will take care of Storm Shadow. And we see that both Storm Shadow and Stalker have been imprisoned in the torch of the Statue of Liberty. Back in the gulag, we see Snake Eyes clearing out the prison guards before Major Blood arrives on the scene, having been hired by the jugglers to kill Snake Eyes to stop him from freeing Strawwhacker. As Snake Eyes is busting heads, Major Blood lines up a shot on him, but it's blocked by a security police officer's head. He does not survive. Soon, Snake Eyes gets into the sewers and comes face to face with the leader of the gulag, who has both Strawwhacker and the White Clown's wife, whose name is Magda, at gunpoint. Outside, we see a train pulling up to the gulag, but for now, that's unimportant. But back in the sewers, we see Snake Eyes absolutely annihilate the guards before Major Blood jumps down to kill Snake Eyes. But the White Clown just jumps on him and hits Major Blood with his gun, while Snake Eyes kills the captain of the gulag and frees the prisoners. After a nice moment where everyone reunites in the sewers, they come back to the surface where we see that the Barovians are planning to execute all of the minorities or imprison them in the gulag. The little girl from earlier goes running up to Snake Eyes and crew, and the leader of the Barovians almost shoots her, but Strawwhacker jumps in and he gets shot himself before all of the people turn on their leader and they try to hang him. But Snake Eyes, with a little bit of pressure from the little girl to snap him out of the ninja mindset, but Snake Eyes saves her. And we also see that the White Clown's wife, Magda, has taken on leading the Barovian people. And Snake Eyes has decided to take the little girl back to America with them because Barovia is not a great place to be, especially when you don't have a dad, because some faceless ninja let him get executed by a bunch of Barovian security police. Back in New York, we see Stalker and Storm Shadow beat up a group of government agents who had been sent to kill them, and they then steal the agent's boat, and they get into a high-speed chase with a helicopter until the helicopter crashes into the boat. But Stalker and Storm Shadow escape by jumping onto a passing cruise ship. We then cut to the burnt-out remains of the Cobra Consulate building, and we see that a new group of assassins called the Night Creepers have been hired by Cobra Commander to kill Storm Shadow. So they run off into the night to track him down. We then see that Storm Shadow and Stalker have made it back to New York City, and they've run to a hideout of Storm Shadows on top of a building in a water tower. Meanwhile, back at the hospital with Scarlet, we see that she has gone AWOL. She is not in the hospital anymore, and Hawk doesn't know where she went, but we do, because she went to get revenge for Snake Eyes by stabbing Storm Shadow with a knife. Meanwhile, back at Storm Shadow's water tower, we see that the Night Creepers are fast approaching, and so Storm Shadow opens up the action, killing a ninja by stabbing him through the roof of the water tower, while Stalker drops out the bottom and kills it and shoots a couple. Storm Shadow then busts out the bow and arrow, using it only for one shot before slashing up a few ninja, and then jumping off the building, taking 2 more Night Creepers down on the way. We also see Stalker pick up a clue to the location of the ninjas, or to the location they came from, while the chase continues with Storm Shadow picking off the Night Creepers as he goes, until he runs into Scarlet, who again wants to stab him. But Storm Shadow tackles Scarlet to get her out of the danger zone, out of the line of fire of the ninjas, and the two go under a train. But we see that that even though the Night Creepers think they're dead, they both make it, and in between a couple of the train cars. But we see that in the tumbling, Scarlet did stab Storm Shadow in the back with her knife. We then cut back to the hospital, where we see Snake Eyes has made it back from the U.S., and he wants to visit Scarlet. But he finds her bed empty and thinks the worst, until Stalker arrives and tells Snake Eyes about everything that's been going on with him and Storm Shadow, and that he can't find Storm Shadow or Scarlet. So Snake Eyes goes to one of his ninja hideouts where he keeps all his weapons, and Storm Shadow and Scarlet are both there. And Storm Shadow is dying from the various wounds that he's inflicted, but specifically from Scarlet's knife. But Snake Eyes puts him in the ninja trance until an ambulance arrives, and they all pile in. But while they're driving, Stalker gives Snake Eyes the clue that he found, and Snake Eyes recognizes it. So as they drive past the Cobra Consulate building, Snake Eyes is suddenly not in the ambulance anymore, and he shows up inside the building and he just busts some heads and he clears out the snake den. We then see a couple of brief epilogues where we see that Magda is using her power as the newly elected president of Barovia to help take down the jugglers, and we see that Snake Eyes took the little Barovian girl to his civilian friend Wade Collins' house to adopt her. Wade Collins was at one point a Crimson Guard, but with Snake Eyes' help, he basically reformed him, and now Wade lives in like upstate New York or something. But yeah, anyway, that's the story, and it's an odd one. It's actually pretty good. I kind of like it. It's fun. It's very referencey to a lot of older G.I. Joe stories, to even going all the way back to G.I. Joe issue 1, where Snake Eyes' hideout, where Snake Eyes' ninja hideout is the same place that we first see him in the sensory deprivation, or maybe that's issue 2. That's issue 2, where we see Snake Eyes in the sensory deprivation tank. It's kind of just a fun little reference. A lot of the action in this story is really cool. You get a lot of good action shots of Snake Eyes busting heads. You get that really good sequence drawn by Lee Weeks of Storm Shadow taking down the Storm Shadow versus the Night Creepers. There's a lot of fun elements to this run. It's just weirdly, it's very anticlimactic, which is odd because there's no climax, but that's part of the problem. Cobra's involvement at the end feels a little contrived, honestly. It feels a little. It's a little odd that Cobra Commander's kind of just hanging out in with the Night Creepers at the very end there. But it's fine. I definitely would have liked it. I think I would have liked it better without Cobra's involvement, or with Cobra being involved slightly less. I don't know. I thought overall it was a fine story. It's odd that Storm Shadow just decides, hey, Snake Eyes needs a suicide mission to go on so that he gets over Scarlet dying, even though Scarlet's not actually dead. Scarlet's sister comes out of nowhere, we do have one of those very very G.I. Joe issues 80 and up moments where Larry Hama cooks up some cockamamie familial connection where the refugee that Snake Eyes is going to save, or the POW that Snake Eyes is going to save, is his dead sister's fiance, and that has hardly any bearing on the story when they meet face to face. There's Strawwhacker recognizes him, but that's about it. And it's not a major part of the story, so it doesn't feel as bad as the Snake Eyes trilogy or as Converging Destinies, where it's like, okay, we're over connecting everything a little too much, and we haven't even gotten to the worst example of that yet. But one of the other odd things about this story is Major Blood's reappearance. We haven't seen Major Blood in quite a while. I don't know exactly when the last time we saw him was, but I want to say sometime around issue 80, maybe even earlier than that, now that I'm thinking about it. We might not have seen him since issue 58. And he shows up again here in this story. He's been hired by the jugglers to kill Snake Eye, or to stop Snake Eyes from freeing Strawwhacker. But Snake Eyes and Major Blood don't even fight. The Snake Eyes just gets knocked out by the White Clown. The whole Barovian section of this is really interesting, because Barovia is another one of those countries in the G.I. Joe comic, kind of like Sierra Gordo, where that is just somewhat reoccurring. There was a long 8-part story, maybe, that took place in Barovia starting in issue 60. That was really good. This one that's where we're introduced to like the White Clown and his little dwarf friend, and the concept of the White Clown's wife, and all that kind of stuff. And these issues are good. You get a lot of good fun Snake Eyes Commando style action. He's still just shooting people with his Uzi. He's not using his swords and knives and all that stuff as his primary weapon yet. But yeah, it's not a bad story. It just feels a little contrived. Scarlet waking up and immediately like going after Storm Shadow for revenge, like planning to harm him physically, it does feel out of character. I do like having some of Snake Eyes' only words in the comic, because he did write a bunch of stuff in the very last issue of the series and in issue 4 of the series, but his only spoken words are just him being sad about Scarlet. It's kind of a sweet moment, very unnecessary, but not terrible. And honestly, as I'm reading these issues, issue to issue, they're not bad. But when I read them like all in a row, they're not good either. Reading the whole greater context of the G.I. Joe comic, they're not great. We get some pretty low stakes action here. But it's fun. It's fun from the G.I. Joe comic. And I do appreciate it for that. This story is absent of a lot of the problems that plague the G.I. Joe comic of the same time. We're not being introduced constantly to new characters. We're not being there's no, in this story, there's no wasted characters. If you were to point to one, it would be Major Blood. There's no reason to have it specifically be Major Blood versus any other assassin, but it also kind of works because of that. Cobra Commander is kind of ancillary, but he just shows up at the very end, and he shows up as a plot excuse for how the Night Creepers get involved. So again, I give it a pass. And honestly, it's kind of just a fun. You get some fun ninja action. You get good Lee Weeks covers. You get good Mark Bright interiors. I really do enjoy Mark Bright's action sequences. Mark Bright's always been one of my favorite artists. His run on G.I. Joe is not the best, but I really like his work on Iron Man and a couple of other titles I've seen him do. And his Iron Man and his Green Lantern are probably my two favorites, which makes sense since they're two of my favorite characters. But anyway, I do think the art does a good job. I think the art is nice here. There's a good flow to the action sequences. Yeah, I do find myself overall that I enjoy this little story and this little run. And a lot of that is due to Mark Bright's art and some of the writing certainly isn't bad. It just sometimes feels a little overcomplicated in some areas and then undercomplicated in others. Like sometimes it feels like, oh, this story idea needed a little more time in the cooker, and sometimes it feels like this story idea needed less time in the cooker. But this specific run, it's pretty good. It's fun. I would say that I end up recommending it more than not. It is just hard that it's so interwoven with everything that I talked about last video, with Cobra Commander's like big action in the small podunk town of Millville, and Roadblock's adventures in Sierra Gordo, and there's just so much going on, and this ninja and all this Snake Eyes stuff takes place again just completely interspersed throughout all of that other stuff. And I've pulled a lot of it. I've separated those two stories for the sake of the videos, because that would be a long video if I tried to do it all at once. But reading it in the comics, I picked 3 pages out of this issue, a couple pages out of each of these, and it's so I like the actual issues I like the actual story parts that are about Snake Eyes, but I don't end up liking a lot of the full issues because they're so interspersed with Snake Eyes and Roadblock and Mutt and Junkyard and Millville, and it just feels like a lot's going on at once. And I definitely do appreciate what we're coming up into, which is very focused, very very broken down story, or very simple story. Not simple, very measurable stories where you don't get a lot of overlap. You kind of just get these little 4-part stories that are very much so you can pick up and read it, and then you can put it back down without all of this constant through lining. But there is still character work that goes through multiple of those stories, which is nice. But anyway, that's putting the cart before the horse. We're getting ahead of ourselves. But yeah, overall, I would say I end up recommending. I end up feeling more positive than negative about the Mark Bright, Larry Hama era of G.I. Joe. Mark Bright might actually be my favorite artist who works on G.I. Joe. I know I said that one of the last times I talked about G.I. Joe about Mike Vosberg, but it's probably Bright, Vosberg, or Herb Trimp, even though I don't always love Herb Trimp. But those 3 do a really good job bringing the world of G.I. Joe to life. And yeah. But anyway, that's really all I've got on this story. So we'll cut it there. But yeah, I'm just another guy named James. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.